Over the past few years, there have been numerous cases of young black men being lured out to small remote towns across America, with many of these victims ending up deceased or are simply never seen again. But despite the harrowing evidence that continues to stack up each year, the idea of sundown towns in modern-day America has become somewhat of a myth, with many people believing these towns to be nothing more than a dark period of our history. However, if you just spend a few minutes in the comments section of my videos, you will quickly begin to see that many people of colour would beg to differ, as stories of sundown towns are not only real, but continue to unfold to this day. Now, if you are familiar with my channel, then you will likely be aware of my running series where I take a deeper look into these cases in an attempt to try and spread awareness. But during my research, a concerning pattern has started to emerge which seems to link all of these cases together, and therefore I can't help but feel that the subject of sundown towns deserves its own video. So rather than focusing on just one case, please brace yourself as I attempt to delve into the murky waters of this incredibly controversial topic, starting with the suspicious disappearance of Davohnte Morgan. On Wednesday the 5th of May in 2020, a 28-year-old man named Davohnte Morgan had travelled up to the small town of Mount Shasta for a family birthday party, but after getting into a heated argument with his girlfriend that morning, Davohnte would storm out of the motel, never to be seen or heard from again. He was reported missing 2 days later after he failed to return home, but police noticed a distinct lack of emotion in his girlfriend's voice, and they were left alarmed after finding out that Davohnte's phone was broken, and therefore there was no way of tracking his whereabouts. However, after almost a week of investigating, the police were finally able to uncover some surveillance footage of Davohnte from the day he disappeared, which showed him walking into a gas station alone. But despite conducting numerous searches of the area and knocking on every single door, no further leads would be uncovered, eventually leading the case to turn cold. And given the lack of witnesses, Davohnte's family began to feel like something wasn't right with this town. According to them, locals would be seen tearing down the missing person posters and showed no interest in helping the family find their loved one, so at the time it seemed like there was nowhere else to turn. However, around 2 months after his disappearance, a witness would finally come forward after bumping into Davohnte's brother Anthony, who would reveal that he had seen the missing young man climbing into a white truck, and rumours began to spread that he had been taken to the Shasta River to be disposed of. But despite these bold claims, the local police were unable to find any evidence to back them up, so once again, the case would turn cold, with Davohnte unfortunately remaining a missing person to this day. However, as disturbing as this story may seem, this is certainly not the first time a man has been lured out by a woman to a small town, shortly before disappearing, as demonstrated by this next case. On Thursday the 28th of December, a 28-year-old rapper from Oregon named Tykerrious Ray was last seen driving his pickup truck through the town of Roseburg when he would mysteriously disappear. 2 days later, his white Dodge Durango was found abandoned on the side of a highway just outside of town, and was swiftly towed away by the police. However, after inspecting the vehicle, a cell phone was then discovered on the passenger seat that belonged to Tykerrious, so unfortunately they were unable to get in touch with the young man and instead held on to the evidence. A week then went by with Tykerrious still failing to inquire about his truck, but given his troubled history with the law, it was initially assumed by the police that he was purposely choosing not to get in touch. However, in an instant, everything would change, when the Roseburg Police Department received a call from his family, claiming that they hadn't heard from or seen the 28-year-old in 10 days, and they were rightfully concerned for his safety. So, given these details, an official missing person report was then filed, and his image was plastered across the news and social media in the hopes that somebody would recognise his face. But unfortunately, after 8 months of searching, it would seem that Tykerrious Ray is still nowhere to be found, with the most popular theory stating that he was lured out to Roseburg by his girlfriend, who had nefarious intentions. But unfortunately, this pattern of young black men being lured out to small towns just a few days before they go missing is something which has repeated itself multiple times across the Northwest. But unlike with these first two cases, it's not always a woman who does the luring. On Monday the 7th of August earlier this year, a 33-year-old musician from California named Corey Daniely would suddenly disappear after getting into a fight with one of his friends before supposedly storming off into the night, never to be seen again. To this day, his whereabouts are still unknown, but the Fresno Police Department, along with Corey's family, strongly believe that the missing man is likely deceased due to the suspicious circumstances that surround his case, and with key suspects like Zach Stiles, who was the last person to see Corey alive after inviting him out to the small town of Kerman, and has since mysteriously relocated to Hawaii. It's no surprise that they have come to this conclusion. However, despite the rising stack of evidence that seems to point in the direction of murder, after almost 1 year of investigation, the police are still yet to reveal what really happened to Corey Daniely that night, which has understandably left the public questioning whether there could be some kind of cover-up going on, which unfortunately seems to be a recurring theme across these cases, as with many small towns you will usually find that they also possess a very small police department, meaning resources are almost always stretched, so with little evidence to go off, it's no surprise that many of these cases go unsolved. However, in some circumstances, there can be an abundance of suspicious evidence to go off, but somehow the police still fail to find a conclusion, and in some cases even refuse to admit the involvement of foul play. On the 9th of July in 2013, a 24-year-old model named Ryan Singleton was driving his car through the Mojave Desert on his way back to LA to see his friend after spending the day in Vegas, when his car would suddenly break down. A passing highway patrol officer noticed Ryan walking along the side of the road and offered to drive him to the nearby town of Baker to get further assistance, and upon arrival, he then called one of his friends for help and agreed to meet them at the rest stop. But in a strange twist of fate, once the friend arrived to pick him up, Ryan had mysteriously disappeared. A missing person report was filed the very next day, but there would be no real updates in the case until 2 months later, when his decomposing remains were finally discovered in the middle of the desert. Initially, it was assumed that this was just a tragic accident. However, when the coroner's report came back a few weeks later, it was soon revealed that Ryan's body was missing at least 6 of its organs. However, 10 years on, the local police still refused to believe that foul play was involved, leaving his family understandably furious and desperate for justice. Which, once again, is a very common theme shared across all of these stories, as families desperately hold on to the idea of closure. But unlike the other cases that I've mentioned so far, these men aren't always lured out to remote towns by people they know. On Thursday the 9th of May earlier this year, a 35-year-old father named Shun Riley was supposed to be on a remote work trip in the city of Kelso, Washington, when he would mysteriously disappear. A few days after arriving, he would accidentally call his wife Mary in the early hours of the morning, to which she could only hear muffled sounds for 3 minutes before eventually deciding to hang up the phone. However, concerned by the strange phone call, she immediately called him back in the hopes that he would pick up and explain the situation. But to her confusion, after answering the phone, Shun would continue to make muffled sounds before a voice could be heard clearly stating, "Go this way, go this way." Mary then hung up again after failing to get her husband's attention and called the hotel he was staying at to ask if they could conduct a wellness check at 3 AM. But once again, she was left puzzled when the hotel staff confirmed that his hotel room was unlocked and Shun was nowhere to be seen. So after her confusion quickly escalated to fear, Mary then called the local police to report the incident, and soon after accessing the security footage at the hotel, they discovered that Shun could be seen leaving the hotel alone, looking like he was in an extreme amount of distress. So in response to this troubling news, Mary and the rest of the family instinctively travelled all the way up from Long Beach, California, to look for Shun themselves and to help spread awareness of his case. However, after 1 week of searching, his body was eventually discovered in the Cowieman River near Manasco Drive, which was located just a short distance from the Comfort Inn hotel he was staying at, with many believing it wouldn't be long before the guilty suspect was found. But to everybody's surprise, after 3 months of investigating, the case still remains unsolved, leaving Shun's family heartbroken and confused, as they try to understand what could have happened to their loved one and why his killer has still not been found after all this time. which is unfortunately the very same situation being experienced by a grieving father that still continues to hold on to the hope that his son will eventually return home. On Wednesday the 23rd of June in 2021, a 24-year-old geologist named Daniel Robinson was driving home from work through a desert in Arizona when he mysteriously disappeared. After failing to make it home that day, Daniel was eventually reported missing by his father David Robinson after the local police insisted that he wait 12 hours before officially making the claim. The investigation therefore started the next day, however they wouldn't find any evidence until almost 1 month later, when Daniel's car was finally discovered on a ranch 3 miles away, crashed and abandoned with the airbags deployed. Surprisingly, however, there was still no sign of Daniel. And after 3 years of searching, the police are still no closer to finding out what really happened to the 24-year-old geologist. Many theories have been discussed, but with this case being so tightly guarded by the Buckeye Police Department, Daniel's father fears we may never get to the bottom of this mystery, which has understandably led many to wonder if something more nefarious could be at play here. But with so many other cases possessing similar details, it's no surprise that connections have been drawn by the public, as demonstrated by this next case. On Friday the 5th of October in 2018, a 26-year-old TV producer named Terrence Woods was supposed to be filming a documentary out in the town of Grangeville when he would mysteriously vanish. According to witnesses, Terrence had been behaving extremely unusual that day, but nobody could have expected him to suddenly run off in the middle of a shoot as they watched him jump down a 15-foot cliff edge and disappear into the woods. Immediately after these events took place, members of the film crew chased after him, but they were unable to catch up, resulting in the young man ending up alone in the wilderness. But determined to make sure he was okay, the crew then reported him missing to the local police. However, by this time, the sun was beginning to go down, so the officers decided to conduct a search first thing in the morning. K9 units, helicopters, and infrared technology were utilised, and Terrence's family even flew across the country to aid in the search. But despite the huge efforts of everybody involved, the missing young man was never located, and so almost 6 years later he continues to remain a missing person. But in a similar vein to the family of Daniel Robinson, despite the ever-increasing time-lapse of Terrence's disappearance, his family continue to hold out hope that he will return, which is a sentiment that is also shared by the grieving family of this next victim. On Sunday the 22nd of October, a 46-year-old father of two named Namrud Tessema was supposed to be off on a spiritual retreat in the town of Mercer in Wisconsin, when he would mysteriously disappear without a trace. He was reported missing soon after by his friends when they noticed his sudden absence from the group, but by then it was already too late, as it would appear that Rudy was nowhere to be found. Sightings of the 46-year-old would soon come in, with witnesses claiming to have seen a man matching his description walking around in bare feet in the Mercer area. But unfortunately, these leads would inevitably come up empty upon investigation, and to this day, Rudy continues to remain a missing person. However, given the concerning details that surround his case, many are starting to wonder if he could have been a victim of the racial inequality that still plagues the state of Wisconsin, especially given the town's affiliation with the famous racial hate group that I will refuse to name. But one thing that has come out of this case is the revelation that most modern-day sundown towns are not located in the Deep South as you would guess, as nowadays you are much more likely to find areas of racial divide in the Midwest, with Wisconsin and Illinois climbing to the top of the list, a fact which can be perfectly illustrated by this next case. On Tuesday the 18th of September in 2018, a 40-year-old father named William Young was discovered hanging lifeless from a tree in the small city of Peru, Illinois, with the initial cause of death being ruled as self-inflicted by the local police. However, as the weeks went by, details started to emerge surrounding William's death, including the fact that the police would refuse to let his family conduct a private autopsy of the body, threatening to cremate the remains if they didn't organise a swift burial. But to make matters worse, it was then leaked to the public that William's car had received damages on the passenger side, like it had been rammed by another vehicle, and his belongings were also scattered all over the place as if there had been some kind of struggle. But despite these incredibly suspicious details, no official investigation would ever take place, with the LaSalle Police Department remaining adamant that no foul play was involved. So, given the long list of questionable activity related to this case, alongside the fact that his body was found less than a mile away from where another body was discovered just a few years later, it's no surprise that many are starting to wonder if these potential lynchings have been hidden from the public by the very same people that are hired to protect us. And just to further drive this point home, I will quickly run through the details of another case from Peru, which I'm sure many of you will be familiar with. On Tuesday the 24th of August in 2021, a 25-year-old graduate student named Jelani Day was on his way to Illinois State University for an important meeting with his professor. However, after arriving on campus in the early hours of the morning, he would make the extremely out-of-character decision to skip his meeting and instead drive over to a cannabis dispensary, which would be his last official sighting. The young man was quickly reported missing by his mother after she received a call from the university about his absence, but strangely, the police refused to act, given that Jelani had only been missing for a few hours, so the official report wasn't made until the next day. But unfortunately, this decision would soon reveal itself to be a grave mistake, as Jelani's car was eventually discovered around 60 miles away in the neighbouring city of Peru, and after searching the nearby river, his decomposing body was found. An investigation into Jelani's death was immediately conducted. However, despite the incredibly nefarious nature of this case, the police are still yet to apprehend a suspect, believing the most likely cause of death to be self-inflicted drowning. So not only does this case remain unsolved, but the police are refusing to believe that foul play is involved, which is a very unfortunate theme across many of these cases. On Sunday the 18th of December in 2022, a 19-year-old man named Kadin Black was supposed to be spending the morning at his father's house to help look after the dogs, as he did every Sunday. But strangely, after failing to show up that day, he would mysteriously disappear, and hasn't been seen since. After noticing that Kadin hadn't arrived, his father Maurice then called up their neighbour Chris Faust to ask if he had seen his son, as at the time Kadin had been staying with him temporarily. However, Chris would respond by claiming that Kadin was likely asleep upstairs, so not wanting to cause a fuss, Maurice simply accepted that his son wasn't coming and continued on with his day as normal. But once Tuesday rolled around, Chris realised that he hadn't physically seen Kadin since Saturday afternoon, so he quickly made the decision to call his mother, Cara, to ask if he had perhaps travelled over to her house without telling anyone. But to his surprise, Cara would state that she too hadn't seen Kadin, and had last spoken to him around 6 days prior, so at this point, with nowhere else to turn, Chris decided to call the local police department to officially report Kadin as missing. However, despite the immense efforts of the authorities, almost 2 years later, Kadin still remains a missing person to this day, with many people associating his disappearance with the fact that he had recently moved back to the town of Wrightsville, which is home to an incredibly small number of black residents. And this also seems to be the situation with this next victim, after he decided to head out to the town of Taylorsville for work, before mysteriously disappearing. On Saturday the 1st of October, almost 2 years ago, a 25-year-old man from Mississippi named Rasheem Carter would call his mother in a panic, claiming that he was being followed by a group of men in trucks, who were shouting racial slurs in his direction. So, fearing for her child's life, she immediately advised him to head over to the nearest police station to report the incident and to ask for a lift home. However, in response to his pleas, the Taylorsville Police Department claimed that they were not a taxi service, and that because his home was out of their jurisdiction, there was nothing they could do. So, with no other options, Rasheem then called a family friend to pick him up from a gas station in Taylorsville, to which she agreed. However, after arriving on the scene, Rasheem was mysteriously nowhere to be found, eventually leading his mother to file a missing persons report. But unfortunately, there would be no updates to the case until around a month later, when the skeletal remains of Rasheem Carter were found, with his head separated from his body. Despite the incredibly controversial details, however, to this day the case remains an open investigation, with the police strongly believing that nobody else was involved and that his death was nothing more than an accident. So, once again, we see a young black man disappearing in a small remote town before turning up deceased with little to no explanation available. so it's no wonder that many people have started to associate Taylorsville with racism, which is a label that has also been attached to this next town. On Wednesday the 2nd of November in 2022, a 17-year-old boy named Cion Carroll left his grandmother's house in Kenbridge, Virginia in the early hours of the morning to cool off after the pair had got into a small argument, but unfortunately, he was never seen alive again. Cion was reported missing the next day by his mother Tiffany Baker after he failed to return home and refused to answer his cell phone. So concerned for his well-being, the whole family headed out to Kenbridge to hand out flyers and look for the missing teenager. However, after 8 days of searching, they were mortified to find out that a police officer named Ben Barnes would miraculously stumble upon a gravesite in which he would discover the dismembered remains of Cion Carroll. But this already controversial case would take yet another shocking twist when it was revealed that Cion's cell phone was discovered next to the home of a registered sex offender, leading the public to believe that it wouldn't be long before the case was wrapped up. But to everyone's surprise, this suspect was quickly removed from the registry, with his identity remaining a secret to this day, and to make matters even worse, the police officer responsible for finding Cion's body would coincidentally decide to resign without explanation before disappearing into thin air. So, given the incredibly suspicious nature of this case, it is no surprise that Cion's family have continued to plead with the public for help, as it would certainly seem that something nefarious is going down in Kenbridge, Virginia. Now, just before I end the video, I wanted to take a brief moment to decompress and reflect on all the stories that featured on this video, as I can't stress enough just how concerning these patterns really are. I'm sure a few of you will be thinking that these cases are tragic and suspicious, but to align them all with Sundown Towns specifically might be a stretch. But as I mentioned at the start of this video, there is an underlying theme here which every single story possesses, which is that these men all disappeared from areas they were not native to. Davohnte Morgan was visiting Mount Shasta for a family party. Tykerrious Ray had moved across the country to Roseburg to be with his girlfriend. Daniely was visiting a friend in Kerman. Ryan Singleton broke down in the remote desert town of Baker. Shun Riley had accepted a job up in Kelso. Daniel Robinson was working as a geologist in Buckeye. Terrence Woods had travelled to Grangeville to film a reality TV show. Namrud Tessema had followed his friends out to Mercer. William Young was travelling through the town of Peru to visit his friend, with Jelani Day also deciding to travel to Peru for the likely purpose of meeting a love interest. Kadin Black had recently moved back to Wrightsville before moving in with another family. Rasheem Carter was only out in Taylorsville for work purposes, and Cion Carroll had recently moved out to Kenbridge to stay out of trouble. So no matter how you choose to look at this, there is surely something concerning about the fact that so many young black men have disappeared under the same circumstances in very recent years. And to connect these cases to Sundown Towns specifically, keep in mind that every single place that these men disappeared from had a significant lack of diversity, with black residents being the smallest demographic across every single town. Now, I'm not saying that statistics alone prove that an area is racist, but given that so many of these cases are connected to areas that are home to predominantly white residents, I think it would be dangerous to overlook this as a possibility. So if there's one message to take from this video, it would be to avoid these towns if you can, as regardless of how you feel towards the idea of Sundown Towns, the fact that these incredibly suspicious cases remain unsolved after so many years should be reason enough to stay clear of them. Anyway, I think I'll leave this video here, but please let me know your thoughts in the comments and if there are any other cases you would like me to cover. The channel seems to be going through a bit of a rough patch at the moment, so any support you can provide is greatly appreciated. But until next time, thank you so much for watching, and if there were any cases that I featured in this video which you would like to learn more about, feel free to check out the playlist on screen now.